In the decades following the Second World War, the Soviet Union defined itself through power. Not only military power, but industrial power, scientific power, and ideological power. In a world divided between East and West, nuclear energy became more than a technological breakthrough. It became a symbol. To the Soviet leadership, atomic energy represented modernity, control over nature, and proof that socialism could rival or surpass the capitalist West. Reactors were not merely infrastructure. They were monuments to progress. Electricity meant industrial growth. Industrial growth meant economic strength. Economic strength meant geopolitical survival. By the 1960s and 1970s, nuclear plants were spreading across Soviet territory at remarkable speed. The Cold War demanded constant demonstration of advancement. The space race, ballistic missile development, and nuclear energy programs were all part of the same strategic competition. Within this environment, speed often took precedence over caution. The Soviet nuclear program operated in a system that discouraged public criticism. Technical concerns were discussed internally, but transparency was limited. Design flaws were not openly debated in public forums. Admitting vulnerability could be interpreted as weakness, and weakness was unacceptable in a superpower rivalry. At the center of this expanding nuclear network was a particular reactor design, the RBMK. The RBMK reactor, an acronym derived from Russian technical terminology, was powerful and efficient. It was capable of generating large amounts of electricity. It also had an additional strategic advantage. It could produce plutonium suitable for weapons development. In a Cold War context, this dual capability made it attractive, but the design was complex. Unlike many Western reactors that use containment domes and different moderator systems, the RBMK used graphite to moderate the nuclear reaction and water to cool the core. Under stable conditions, this configuration functioned effectively. However, under certain low-power conditions, the reactor could become unstable. One particular characteristic would later prove critical: the positive void coefficient. In simplified terms, as steam bubbles formed in the cooling water, the nuclear reaction could accelerate instead of slowing down. In certain scenarios, this meant that reducing cooling efficiency could increase reactivity, a dangerous feedback loop. This was not widely understood by all operators. Some engineers were aware of potential instability, but documentation was incomplete, and communication between design institutions and plant operators was imperfect. In the Soviet system, information often moved slowly across bureaucratic layers. Reactor construction continued. Chernobyl nuclear power plant was built near the Pripyat River in northern Ukraine. Construction began in the early 1970s. The location was chosen for access to water, distant from major urban centers, and integration into regional power grids. Alongside the plant, a new city was constructed, Pripyat. Pripyat was designed as a model Soviet community. Modern apartment blocks rose quickly. Schools, hospitals, cultural centers, and recreational facilities were built to accommodate the plant's workforce. The average age of residents was remarkably young. Engineers and skilled workers relocated with their families, believing they were contributing to a national mission. Life in Pripyat symbolized technological optimism. Residents enjoyed relatively high living standards compared to many other Soviet towns. Salaries at the plant were competitive. Employment was prestigious. The nuclear sector was considered elite. To live in Pripyat was to live in the future. By the mid-1980s, 4 RBMK reactors were operational at Chernobyl. 2 additional reactors were under construction. The plant supplied a significant portion of Ukraine's electricity. From a distance, it represented stability and progress. Inside control rooms, however, Reality was more complicated. Operating an RBMK reactor required strict adherence to procedures. Yet the culture of the time placed heavy emphasis on meeting production targets. Reactor downtime affected energy supply. Energy supply affected industrial output. Industrial output affected political expectations. Hierarchy shaped decision-making. Operators were trained to follow instructions. Engineers reported to supervisors. Supervisors reported upward. Questioning authority was uncommon, particularly in high-pressure environments. This culture did not eliminate competence. Many operators were experienced and technically skilled, but it did create an environment in which hesitation was discouraged. In 1986, reactor number 4 was scheduled for maintenance. During this shutdown, plant managers planned to conduct a safety test. The objective was to determine whether the turbine generator could provide enough residual electrical power during a loss of external electricity to keep cooling pumps operating until emergency diesel generators activated. The test had been attempted previously but had not produced satisfactory data. This time, the procedure would be completed. On April 25, 1986, the test sequence began. Reactor power was gradually reduced in preparation for shutdown, but external factors interfered. Grid controllers requested that the reactor continue operating longer than planned to meet electricity demand. As a result, the power reduction was delayed. Hours later, when operators resumed the shutdown sequence, conditions inside the reactor were no longer ideal. Power levels dropped lower than intended. To compensate, operators withdrew control rods, devices designed to absorb neutrons and regulate the reaction. This action stabilized power temporarily but created a precarious configuration. The reactor was now operating in a low-power state with many control rods removed. This was precisely the condition in which the RBMK design was most unstable. Yet the test proceeded. At approximately 1:23 a.m. on April 26, the final phase of the experiment began. Steam flow to the turbines was reduced. Cooling dynamics changed. Within seconds, power levels began to fluctuate dramatically. Operators pressed the emergency shutdown button. Control rod began descending into the core. But in the RBMK design, the control rods had graphite tips. As they initially entered the core, they displaced neutron-absorbing coolant and momentarily increased reactivity. In a reactor already unstable, this effect proved catastrophic. Power surged uncontrollably. Fuel channels ruptured. Steam pressure built rapidly. Within seconds, a massive explosion tore through reactor number 4. The first explosion was likely a steam explosion. A second explosion followed, possibly involving hydrogen and graphite. The reactor building was destroyed. The 1,000-ton upper biological shield was blown aside. The core was exposed to the atmosphere. Graphite blocks ignited. Radioactive material was ejected into the night sky. In Pripyat, residents heard a dull shockwave. Some saw a strange blue glow rising above the plant. Many assumed it was an electrical accident. They did not yet understand what had happened. At the plant, firefighters were dispatched immediately. They were told a roof fire needed extinguishing. Most were unaware of radiation levels. They wore standard firefighting gear, not protective radiation suits. They climbed onto the burning reactor building. They stood on debris that emitted lethal radiation. Within hours, many began experiencing nausea, dizziness, and metallic taste in their mouths, early signs of acute radiation sickness. But the scale of the disaster was not yet publicly acknowledged. Initial reports of Moscow were incomplete. Local officials hesitated to transmit alarming information without confirmation. The Soviet system favored controlled messaging. Meanwhile, the reactor continued burning. Radioactive particles rose into the atmosphere and began drifting across Europe. Sweden would detect abnormal radiation levels before the Soviet Union publicly admitted the accident. Inside Pripyat, daily life continued for nearly 36 hours after the explosion. Children played outside. Weddings took place. Residents gathered to observe the distant fire, unaware of invisible contamination settling around them. Eventually, evacuation orders were issued. Buses arrived. Citizens were told to pack essentials for a temporary departure. Many believed they would return within days. They never did. Pripyat became a silent city. The disaster at Chernobyl did not only expose a reactor flaw, it exposed systemic weaknesses in communication, transparency, safety culture, and political decision-making. In the months and years that followed, hundreds of thousands of liquidators would be mobilized to contain the fallout. A concrete sarcophagus would be constructed over the destroyed reactor. Entire regions would be declared exclusion zones. International confidence in nuclear energy would decline sharply. Within the Soviet Union, the disaster accelerated reforms under Mikhail Gorbachev. Policies of glasnost, openness, gained urgency. Public trust had been damaged. Some historians argue that Chernobyl was one of the events that hastened the collapse of the Soviet Union. A single night, a flawed design, a culture of silence, and an explosion that would echo far beyond Ukraine.